If I told you that the most effective way to lower an aging parent's blood pressure or, preserve their memory and literally stop their cells from aging wasn't a prescription pill, but actually a meeting with a mortgage broker, you would probably think I was completely out of my mind.
I mean, most people would. We are so conditioned to think of medical interventions as strictly clinical, right?
Right, like you go to a pharmacy, you get a little orange bottle, and the transaction is just very contained.
Exactly. We don't usually look at a bank statement and see a health crisis or a health cure for that matter.
Well, welcome to today's deep dive. We are exploring a truly surprising intersection today, which is the direct biological link between housing economics and your physical health. And to do this, we are pulling from a stack of sources that treat this subject like a daily wealth pulse briefing.
Yeah, we've got some great material today.
We really do. We have the daily mortgage intelligence reports from April 2026, some cutting-edge health and wellness briefings on longevity, and the strategic insights from a book by Kim Gedstad called One Reason to Not Get a Reverse Mortgage.
And the mission for this deep dive is to map out how macroeconomic market volatility isn't just this, abstract concept on a spreadsheet. It is actively impacting human biology at a cellular level.
It's crazy to think about.
It really is. And we need to look at how a highly specific and honestly historically misunderstood financial tool might actually be the ultimate medical intervention for you or for the seniors in your life.
So to understand the biological toll here, we first have to establish the sheer scale of the financial pressure cooker that people are living in right now. Looking at the spring 2026 housing market, the best way I can describe the data is, well, it's a giant financial traffic jam.
That's a really good analogy.
Right, because you have all these cars out on the highway with their engines idling, they're burning gas, but going nowhere. I mean, people clearly want to move. The sources show that housing touring activity is up 23% since the start of the year.
Yeah, people are physically out there looking at open houses.
Exactly.
And they're being teased by the numbers, too. Like, if you look at the mid-April data, the 30-year fixed mortgage rate just dropped to 6.25%.
It's just a pretty big deal.
Right. That is down from 6.46%, which actually represents the steepest single-week drop we have seen in months. I mean, Zillow even shows some lenders offering 6.15%, and the 15-year fixed is averaging right around 5.62%.
I look at those numbers and I immediately want to know the why behind them. The reports point to the 10-year Treasury yield sitting at 4.317%. But for those who aren't staring at financial tickers all day, how does a government bond yield dictate the mortgage rate someone gets on a three-bedroom house?
Well, it all comes down to how investors weigh risk and reward. When a bank issues you a mortgage, they usually don't just keep that loan on their books.
Right, they sell it.
Exactly. They package it with thousands of others into mortgage-backed securities and sell them to investors. And those investors are constantly comparing the potential return on those mortgages against the absolute safest bet in the global economy, which is the 10-year U.S. Treasury bond.
Okay, making sense so far.
So if the Treasury yield, the payout on that safe government bond goes up, mortgage rates have to go up even higher just to convince investors to take on the slightly higher risk of a consumer loan.
Got it.
So when we see the 10-year yield ease down to that 4.3% mark, mortgage rates naturally slide down with it to that low 6% range.
Okay, so the rates are easing slightly, and touring is up 23%. By all traditional logic, the traffic jam should be clearing, right? People should be buying and selling. But they aren't. Active listings are only up 4% year over year. I mean, think about your own neighborhood for a second. How many for sale signs have you actually seen this spring compared to, say, 3 or 4 years ago?
Very few, if any, right. And that brings us to the core mechanism that's keeping the market frozen, which is the lock-in effect.
Oh, the lock-in effect, yeah.
Millions of homeowners secured these rock-bottom mortgage rates, around 3% or even lower during the pandemic era. If they sell their current home to buy a new one, they have to abandon that 3% rate and take on a new mortgage at today's 6.25%.
And the math on that is just brutal. I mean, even if they downsize to a smaller house, their monthly payment might actually go up just because of the doubled interest rate.
Exactly. So they stay put. They lock their inventory off the market entirely.
Yeah.
And this artificially restricted supply does incredibly strange things to housing prices. Nationally, for the first time since 2012, home prices dropped 0.2% year over year in February 2026.
But that national average really masks how chaotic the regional data is. It's a completely fragmented reality depending on your zip code.
It really is.
You look at Sunbelt cities, take Cape Coral, Florida, for instance. Prices there are down 9.6%. The pandemic boom towns are cooling off super fast. But then you look at Rust Belt metros where affordability was historically better and the demand is just overwhelming the scarce supply. Kansas City is surging by 8.6%. Pittsburgh is up 5.8%.
Which creates a massive psychological burden for the consumer. You are trying to navigate a market where your local reality completely contradicts the national headlines.
Right.
And layering on top of that local chaos, we have massive macroeconomic forces putting pressure on the actual physical creation of new homes. The sources point specifically to geopolitics and trade policy.
Let's break that down because the reports highlight the current conflict in Iran and ongoing tariffs. Impartially speaking here, looking purely at the economic data, how do overseas conflicts and trade policies stop a house from being built in, like Ohio?
It is a direct chain reaction affecting the cost of materials. The tariffs on imported lumber, steel, and appliances are putting immense pressure on supply chains. Building material price growth is currently holding above 3%.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, and when you increase the raw cost of framing a house, builders who already operate on really tight margins, they have to adapt. If a builder plans a $300,000 entry-level home, a sudden spike in lumber and steel wipes out their profit entirely.
So they just start building entry-level homes. They pivot to building, $800,000 luxury homes where the profit margins are wide enough to absorb the extra cost of materials.
Precisely. The macro trade policy inadvertently chokes off the supply of affordable, everyday homes. And the Iran conflict adds another layer of complexity because it drives up global energy costs.
Which feeds into the inflation problem.
Yes, and that creates volatility in the bond market we just talked about.
I'm looking at this entire system. The lock-in effect, the regional price chaos, the builders abandoning starter homes, and honestly, I'm getting frustrated. If touring is up, demand is there, and the market is physically gridlocked by high costs, why doesn't the Federal Reserve just step in, cut interest rates significantly, and let people move? What are they so afraid of?
They are afraid of reigniting the very inflation they spent years trying to kill. The Federal Reserve, specifically the Federal Open Market Committee, they look at the exact same data we just discussed. They see the tariff-driven material costs. They see the energy spikes from geopolitical tensions.
Right.
If the Fed cuts rates drastically right now, millions of buyers would flood the market. And with supply still artificially low, that surge in demand would cause home prices to explode upward again.
So it's basically pouring gasoline on a fire.
Exactly. That is why the outlook for rate cuts in 2026 has grown highly cautious. The sources indicate that many FOMC members expect zero cuts this year. The broader market expects maybe one modest 0.25% cut, likely delayed all the way until June. The central bank is, frankly, just as trapped by the data as the consumer is.
So millions of people are financially trapped in their current living situations. But what those economic intelligence reports don't show is what that trapped feeling does to the human nervous system day in and day out.
And this is exactly where our deep dive takes a crucial turn.
Exactly. This economic gridlock isn't just an accounting problem. For older adults living on fixed incomes, watching their purchasing power shrink while their home equity sits utterly inaccessible, this market is actively biologically toxic.
We really have to look at how the body processes financial anxiety. It fundamentally changes the conversation around longevity and aging.
And the culture right now is completely obsessed with longevity. I mean, CNN just premiered a series on April 12th called Kara Swisher Wants to Live Forever. The baseline stats from the wellness briefings are universally accepted at this point, right? Getting 7 to 9 hours of sleep boosts your longevity by 18%.
Eating a plant-based diet boosts it by 21%.
Right. And regular exercise reduces your overall death risk by 46%.
What is really interesting here is the shift in the medical community's focus. The goal is no longer vanity anti-aging, just trying to look young or hit the age of 100 while stuck in a hospital bed. The focus is now functional longevity.
Functional longevity, I like that term.
Yeah, that means preserving your strength, your mobility, your cognitive clarity, and your independence into your later years.
And the biotech world is throwing massive capital at this. The sources note a company called Life Biosciences just raised $80 million for something called cell reset therapy, which is now actually entering human trials. But I really have to challenge this whole billionaire tech bro approach to longevity.
Ooh, why is that?
Well, because an $80 million cell reset therapy sounds like amazing science fiction, but it has zero relevance to the average senior. I mean, the biggest hurdle to a long, functionally healthy life isn't a lack of futuristic stem cell injections. It is the everyday grinding stress of financial insecurity.
That's a great point.
We are hyper-focusing on cellular biology while completely ignoring the fact that seniors are losing sleep over property taxes and grocery inflation. Aren't we missing the forest for the trees here?
We absolutely are, and that is the blind spot of the modern wellness industry. Financial stress is the unseen killer that actively unravels functional longevity. When a person is constantly worried about how to stretch a fixed income in a high-inflation environment, the brain perceives that abstract financial threat the exact same way it perceives a physical threat.
Oh.
It triggers the release of cortisol, our primary stress hormone.
I want to break down that mechanism because cortisol isn't always the bad guy, right? If you are walking in the woods and a bear jumps out, you want a massive cortisol spike. It floods your muscles with glucose, increases your heart rate, and gives you the energy to run away.
It is a brilliant evolutionary adaptation for acute short-term survival. The bear chases you, you escape, and within an hour, your parasympathetic nervous system kicks in, and the cortisol recedes back to baseline. The problem is that a volatile housing market and rising inflation aren't a bear.
Right. You can't outrun a property tax assessment.
Exactly. The threat never leaves the kitchen table. Therefore, the cortisol never recedes. When cortisol levels remain chronically elevated for months or years, the hormone stops being a survival tool. It actually becomes a biological toxin.
That sounds intense. What does it actually do to the body?
Chronically high cortisol actively degrades the gut microbiome, which compromises the immune system. It increases arterial plaque, raising the risk of heart disease, and most terrifyingly, it physically damages the brain.
Wait, really? It damages the brain?
Yes. Cortisol binds to receptors in the hippocampus, the brain's memory center, and causes the neural pathways to literally shrivel. Over time, chronic stress actually shrinks the physical volume of the brain.
That completely reframes the whole wellness conversation. I mean, if a senior is drinking their green juice, eating a pristine plant-based diet, and walking a mile a day, but they spend 4 hours every evening agonizing over how to pay their mortgage in this volatile 2026 economy, that daily cortisol gump is systematically dismantling the benefits of their diet and exercise.
It really is.
You cannot green juice your way out of chronic financial terror.
You cannot. The biological damage from that sustained anxiety will completely override the physical interventions.
Which means that solving a senior's cash flow problem is not just a strategic wealth management move. It is a direct physiological medical intervention. Which brings us to the unlikely hero of this deep dive, the reverse mortgage.
It really requires a complete paradigm shift to view a financial product as preventative medicine. But the biological mechanism is undeniable. If chronic financial stress acts as a toxin, then a tool that structurally, permanently removes that stress is functioning exactly like a therapeutic drug.
But I want to push back on this a bit because a lot of listeners might be thinking, isn't a reverse mortgage just trading one form of stress for another? Like, sure, you eliminate the monthly payment, but now you're stressing about draining the primary asset you wanted to leave to your kids. Aren't we just swapping current anxiety for future anxiety?
That is the most common hesitation, absolutely. But it stems from a misunderstanding of how the modern reverse mortgage is structured, particularly the non-recourse feature.
Okay, walk me through that.
A reverse mortgage allows homeowners who are 62 and older to convert a portion of their trapped home equity into liquid cash. The key is that the loan is non-recourse, meaning the borrower or their heirs will never owe more than the home is worth when it is sold. You are not putting a debt burden on your children.
Oh, that's a huge distinction.
Furthermore, by stopping the drain on a senior's liquid cash reserves, like, pulling from a 401k in a down market just to pay a traditional mortgage, you actually preserve the assets that are much easier to pass down to heirs.
So you stop cannibalizing the retirement account to feed the house. That makes sense. And looking at the data, spring 2026 is actually a very strategic window for this. We talked about how rates have eased slightly into the low sixes, which improves borrowing power, but home values are still historically elevated despite that tiny national dip.
Yes, seniors are sitting on massive, inaccessible reserves of wealth right behind their drywall.
And the mechanics of the reverse mortgage unlock it with two vital features. First, there is no monthly mortgage payment required for as long as the borrower lives in the home. Second, because it is based on equity and age rather than current salary, the income qualifications are vastly different from a traditional loan.
Which is life-changing for someone on a fixed income.
I think of the reverse mortgage as, well, financial blood pressure medication. Think about the physics of it. Your house is a pressure vessel full of this built-up trapped pressure, which is your equity. but you can't use it to buy groceries. The reverse mortgage acts as a release valve.
I love that comparison.
Right. It safely vents that pressure into your bank account, giving you liquidity while simultaneously eliminating the monthly payment that was straining your system. You don't have to ingest a chemical compound, you just alter the financial physics of your life, and your biological blood pressure drops back to a healthy baseline.
That analogy maps perfectly onto the physiological reality. By removing the monthly payment, you turn off the cortisol faucet, you halt the accelerated aging and the hippocampal shrinkage dead in its tracks. And the strategic intersection of health and wealth is really the core thesis of Kim Gedstad's book, One Reason to Not Get a Reverse Mortgage.
The title of that book is a brilliant bit of misdirection, honestly. At first glance, it sounds like a massive warning label telling you to run away.
It is a very provocative title, but the actual substance of the text is incredibly rigorous. Gedstad identifies one specific cautionary scenario situations involving certain types of subsidized housing or Medicaid implications to ensure seniors make fully informed decisions.
Which is important.
Extremely important that transparency is the mark of a trustworthy financial strategy. But the overwhelming conclusion of the book, supported by all the data we've reviewed today, is a resounding endorsement of the reverse mortgage as a life-saving tool.
It confirms everything we are looking at. For the vast majority of seniors who are, house rich but cash poor, this tool protects their physical health by securing their financial stability.
Yet, despite the clear economic math and the biological science, this tool still fights an uphill battle against public stigma.
I think the stigma is entirely based on a 1990s paradigm. Decades ago, reverse mortgages were culturally viewed as the absolute loan of last resort. The assumption was that if you got one, it meant you had failed at retirement and were just desperately trying to keep the lights on.
Which couldn't be further from the truth today.
Exactly. That is simply not the reality of the 2026 regulatory environment. Today, consumer protections are incredibly strict, mandatory counseling is required, and the borrowers are often people who did everything exactly right. They worked hard, they paid down their house, but now they are just trapped in a macroeconomic web of inflation and volatile markets.
And the modern financial planning community recognizes this. A house is no longer viewed as this sacred, untouchable monument. It is simply another asset class within a diversified retirement portfolio. Unlocking that equity is not a life raft, it is a highly strategic method of cash flow management.
Let's bring all of this together and look at the whole board. We started by mapping out the volatility of the spring 2026 housing market. We looked at the traffic jam caused by 6.25% rates crashing into the lock-in effect.
We explored how macro trade policies and tariffs on lumber are artificially choking off the supply of affordable homes, and why the Federal Reserve is, well, too terrified of inflation to cut rates and clear the gridlock.
From there, we bridged the gap between the economy and the human nervous system. We detailed how the constant low-grade terror of financial insecurity triggers a chronic cortisol response, which physically shrinks the brain's memory center and accelerates cellular aging, completely undermining the goals of functional longevity.
And finally, we looked at the structural solution. By utilizing a reverse mortgage to unlock trapped equity and permanently eliminate a monthly mortgage payment, seniors can instantly shut down that biological stress response. It is a financial strategy that functions as preventative medicine.
So why does this matter to you as a listener? Because whether you are actively mapping out your own functional longevity, or you are watching your aging parents quietly stress over their grocery bills, understanding this biological cost rewrites the rules of retirement.
It really does. It is not enough to simply outlive your money. You have to ensure that the way your money is structured isn't quietly making you sick.
If you want to dive deeper into the specific mechanics of this strategy and understand how to properly execute it without falling into the outdated traps, you really need to go to the primary source material. You can find Kim Gedstad's book, One Reason to Not Get a Reverse Mortgage, on Amazon or Audible. It is an absolute requirement for anyone trying to navigate the intersection of housing wealth and physical health.
Highly recommend it. It provides a clear, actionable blueprint for transitioning from financial vulnerability to lasting functional longevity.
As we close out today's deep dive, I want to leave you with a final thought that completely flips the script on how we view healthcare. We started out talking about the little orange pill bottle and how narrow our definition of medicine has become, but if the science proves that eliminating financial stress physically preserves the hippocampus, stops arterial plaque, and prevents cellular aging, well, shouldn't we rethink who prescribes our health interventions?
It makes you wonder, should the medical community begin treating financial health as a vital sign?
Think about your next annual physical. Imagine your doctor checking your blood pressure, telling you to increase your daily step count, and then literally writing you a prescription to go meet with a fiduciary mortgage professional to restructure your home equity.
That would be revolutionary.
If the ultimate goal is keeping you alive, sharp, and functionally independent, maybe the most powerful prescription pad belongs in the hands of a strategic wealth planner. Something to think about.